thank you to our partners at the Chicago Public Library Foundation. For those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Dory McCord, and I get the honor of being the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. And I have to say that, as Francie said, we were experimenting some new formats, and the book talk is one of those formats. The Best Humans and a dear friend wrote this book. I thought it was a perfect partnership to begin our partnership with the Chicago Public Library Foundation and really hear for some insights. Quite frankly, he's shared so much wisdom with me all these years. I'm so glad that he put it in the book so now that everyone else can have access to it. So I want to thank Cortney Hall for taking your time today in interviewing Lamell. And definitely, without further ado, Dr. Lamell McMorris, please join us.
Oh, well, I am thrilled to be here at the Executives Club, and I'm thrilled to speak with you, Lamell, because I've heard so much about you. As mentioned, today was a heavy morning.
Yes.
You were very close with the Jackson family.
Yes.
And I just wonder if you'd like to share some reflections on Reverend Jackson.
I appreciate that. First of all, thank you for agreeing to moderate and facilitate
I didn't want to.
this discussion. Yeah, I know. I had to twist a few arms. You had to call in a few favors, but that's what happens when you're a hometown kid. You can call in. But really, thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for taking time out to be here. Hey, cousin, I see my little cousin. Hey, Stratmon's family. I want to really thank everyone for taking time out to be here. I especially want to thank my sister, Dory, for this remarkable invitation. I don't take it lightly. This is the 250th anniversary of the independence of this nation, but also the 100th anniversary of the celebration of Black history. And I take it, and then to add on the irony, if you will, that everything happens in divine order and how it's supposed to happen, that this event would be scheduled at this day and at this time, and that I would arrive last night and get summoned to the home to say goodbye to my dear friend and mentor. Reverend Jackson, when we talk about Black history and this month, but especially when we talk about resilience, he represents both. When I think about the habits that I talk about in the book, many of them are derived from my time with Reverend Jackson. For those of you that didn't know, what Reggie Love was to President Obama, that's what I was to Reverend Jackson in my younger years. And to be able to see the world and the nation through his eyes and through that lens and the experiences we were talking about, right? Africa, the first time I went to the continent of Africa was with Reverend Jackson and all the experiences. And so it's been a remarkably moving day, but one that's filled with gratitude. I talk about work ethic. If you want an incredible work ethic, just spend 5 minutes traveling the world with Reverend Jackson and you'll get it. This notion of being dogged, determined, and also this last habit that I talked about, which is really the foundation of all of them, and the importance of faith. And I know we'll get into all of that, but my friend, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr, modeled most of the habits and the behaviors that I try to live and that I write about in the book. And I'm incredibly honored. I was sitting on the couch this morning with Mrs. Jackson, and we were watching some of the coverage after Jesse Jr. and I returned from delivering his body to the funeral home. And it was quite remarkable, to be sitting there with her and the family watching these stories about Reverend Jackson. And she looked over at me and she said, "Lamell, you were able to be with him when he walked on water." And I said, Mrs. J, I was, and I'm grateful. And I know that may hit some of you, that analogy, that comparison, if you will. But if you had proximity to him in the way that some of us did, and you saw his work, and you saw the evidence, and you saw what he did, And it was a rare glimpse. And yes, most days for me, no matter how mad I would be at him about carrying luggage and crazy stuff that's going on with the schedule, he'd get on a stage and give a speech, or I'd watch him interact with young people, or sit in a business meeting and do just genius stuff that I learned instinctively from being around him. Yeah, in my eyes, in many of our eyes, yeah, he walked on water. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Is there an experience or a moment, an example where he, in that moment, taught you about resilience that you can look back on?
You know, when you travel with a principal, Michael Strautmanis here, who's had the pleasure of traveling with President Obama for decades, you know, when you travel with a principal, they kind of give the same speeches a lot. And so
No.
you can, I can, he can start speeches and
Right.
I can finish them. And he would say many things, but one thing he would say to me and to others, that the ground is no place for a champion. If you were to come over here, Cortney, and knock me down, right, that would be on you. But if you came back next week and I was still down, that would be on me. He would drop these pearls.
That's great.
And, a lot of stuff, honestly, probably, in the middle of traveling with him, probably flew over my head, and I would be sitting somewhere and it would just hit you. A lot of the things. We were riding in the car this morning, coming back from the funeral home, and I told Jesse Jr., I said, your dad would say that when the big tree falls, the wind blows. And he's a big tree that's fallen. And now we have to make sure that we can handle the wind without him. And so he models so much about resilience in his life. And, again, there's several habits that I talk about in the book, particularly work ethic. I watched him get up every morning, and people don't realize the rituals that it takes to, run for president 2 times. I remember the days, Mike, when we used to be able to, we drove the car all the way up to the front door of the White House, all the gates and stuff, and every city we landed, he'd make a list of who we needed to call, what we needed to do. And these are things that I've modeled throughout my life and throughout my career, and that I sort of talk about and tease in the book.
It's clear that you feel resilience is the secret sauce for successful people. I'm curious, how long has this book been in your mind? How long have you felt compelled to write something about resilience and persistence?
Yeah, I did not start out with the desire to write a book. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago this time, I had no idea I was going to be writing a book. But it is an answer to a question that I've been asked over and over. How is it that you continue to go forward? What makes you, continue to propel and persist? And, there are realities. So everyone, just so we're clear, I grew up on the corner of 66 and Cottage Grove in West Woodlawn. My mother still lives there. I was with her this morning before coming over here. At the time that I grew up, there's incredible development that Dory and I have had a chance to partner in my neighborhood and on my block. But at the time that I grew up, it was, and still is in many ways, filled with, vacant lots, blighted buildings. It's a wonder that my brother and I did not get recruited into gang activity, because it was right there, being raised by a single mom. But I always had this vision of who I could be and what I could do that was, not limited to my surroundings. So when I was a kid growing up here in Chicago, I was an expert on current events. So I knew who the governor was, I knew who the mayor was, I knew who the state senator was, I knew who my alderman was, I knew who the president was, who the vice president. I paid attention to every single news story. And from that, Harold Washington, I was very deeply moved, not just by politics and the presidency, but this notion pre-Obama, a Black man becoming mayor of Chicago was like the biggest. And so this desire to be focus on advocacy and public service really started as a kid, going to Beasley and then going to Whitney. And then many times I'd be in the room with adults making decisions, whether on the consoles. My friends would tease me. They would say, Lamell, we're going to the mall, but we know you got a meeting. And it was true. And so what I didn't realize, perhaps, Cortney, as I look back on it, that I didn't know these were the muscles of what it takes to be and to maintain and to live a resilient life, right? Having a vision beyond your circumstances, work ethic. I was not the greatest student, but I knew that, I had to do well and excel in school, but I did excel in extracurricular activities. Emmett, who's here, who's watching me as a kid, I was always going from some school to a meeting, to work to, and so all of this becomes the pathway, if you will, to me being able to write just a little bit about, and I know we talked about this earlier. So you don't get this book and then all of a sudden you check a box, man, I'm resilient now. It's not that. It was very intentional. This is a reference that I hope you not only learn a little bit about me, but you see elements of yourself reflected. The goal was to make this relatable, something that is on the shelf, that you're having a rough day, or a business deal is not going your way, or there's a family issue, or there's something going on with your child, or there's a health concern, there's something. And so maybe you read something in a chapter that will help you, just be a little bit more fortitude, just give you a little bit more something to persist and keep going and know that trouble doesn't last always. And so I don't want you to think that this is going to be a solve everything, but it's an opportunity, frankly, Cortney, for us to go on a resilient journey together. There are elements of habits that I talk about in this book that I've not conquered. One, since before you asked me, I'll tell you, one is this notion of what it means to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is one of the habits that I submit helps us on the pathway to being resilient. I used to think, as a business owner, as a leader, as someone that people look to, that I had to have all the answers. And in no way could I demonstrate that not only that I didn't have all the answers, but that every day I was good and everything was all right all the time. And I actually used to think that by having that mindset, that was liberating. I came to understand that that's actually a constraining mindset. It's actually when you are vulnerable at times to people that you lead, to people that you work with, to people that you're in a relationship with, to people that you're in a family with. It's actually liberating to demonstrate vulnerability, because not only is it freeing to us, it frees the other person to acknowledge that they're not having a great day either. And you know what? I didn't know the answer to that problem either. And boss, I was struggling with this too. So let's figure out how we together, that's difficult. There's some gender dynamics. As a Black male in America, this notion of being vulnerable and what it means to be vulnerable and to demonstrate to people in certain settings, business and otherwise, Mr. Moore, that we don't have all the answers, that's not easy. I can't go to a lot of brothers on the South Side and say, hey man, I need you to embrace this thing about vulnerability. It is a work in progress. It is something that we all, and that's just one of the habits that I think, it's a journey for all of us.
And you use the word muscle. So
yes.
You work a muscle out. You have to keep working it.
You're constantly.
And I mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, I did consume the audiobook, which was wonderful.
Wow.
But this is the type of book where you need the physical copy because you are going to want to refer back to it.
Yeah.
You structured it with a lot of lists, like 1, 2, 3, so people can work through it. What was your intention there, and how? You kind of mentioned this before, you want people to go back and reference it, but what was your intention with the list to make it digestible nuggets?
You hit it right on the head. So let me go back to this notion of being vulnerable. So I'm writing this book. I'm a first-time author. So I didn't know anything, Damona, about writing a book. So the publisher gives you these benchmarks, Dory, that you gotta meet. And so I'm real proud of myself. I turned in my first 5 chapters and I'm beating my chest on before the deadline, and she pushed the book right back. And so I'm like, what's the deal? She says, this isn't gonna work. If people cannot see your resilient journey reflected, not in chapter 10, but right out the gate. Oh, I was furious. I was like, what do you mean? And so I'll never forget it. I let it settle in for a little bit. It was like Sunday night football. I'm sitting in front of the television. I just pulled out my phone and I just started just going at it. I said, okay, let's see what she thinks about this. And then I hit send and she said, okay, you did it. But that was tough. And so the book is written in a way because a lot of, books in this leadership genre, self-help genre, if you will, it's just kind of like, go for it, rah, rah, but there's no action. There's no, okay, like, what do I, how do I stay inspired? How do I continue? And so I was very intentional about making it practical. And by the way, not just for this demographic that's represented here. I think on Thursday, I'll be with some young people at a school. And we wanted to create a book and that had the ability to have a workbook for you, for all of us to continue, because again, it's a process, but especially for young people, like this notion of what it means to be resilient. I was with my goddaughter in LA. She's about 20 something years old, dynamic, cool, living in LA. She's in the fashion industry. And I said, Rainey, your uncle's cool. He wrote a book about resilience. What do you think? And she said, well, can I be honest? I'm paying for dinner, but go ahead. I'm going to still pay for dinner no matter what you say. She said, your generation, looks at my generation with this suck it up. Mm-hmm. We take and are intentional about taking mental health days and taking days off, and you all think that's weak. She said, Uncle Lamell, you have the opportunity with this book about resilience to bridge a gap between your generation of what it has meant historically and ongoing and the principles and habits you talk about in the book, but also how we, as younger people, we're not less resilient. We just do resilience different. Mm. I was like, wow, I gotta write another book. And so that's part of the opportunity, right? To make it relatable, to make it digestible. It is a reference point, but to give us all, work and action steps to take. So that's why I wrote the book.
You talk about the mind-body connection a lot throughout this book, which I thought was really interesting and appropriate for now.
Yeah.
Another point, which I think that we can all relate to, we're all kind of wondering how AI is going to affect our lives, our jobs, if it's already affecting us.
Yeah.
And that's really a point where you have to be resilient and know how to find your purpose when AI might redefine what your purpose is. And you touch on it in the book. Can you give us some of your thoughts on that?
So a few of us just came back from Los Angeles. I was telling you a little bit about this. We were there for NBA All-Star. And a lot of people, when they think about NBA All-Star Weekend, they think about the dunk contest, the three-point contest. But what people don't realize is that there's an invitation-only every Friday morning tech summit around the intersection between tech and sports, and you got all these major leaders of all these tech companies. And so our fellow Chicagoan, the former president of the United States, Mr. Obama, did a fireside chat at this session with Bob Costas. And he was asked the same question about AI. And I think what I would say, Cortney, in connecting it to one of the habits I talk about in the book, it is this ability for all of us to not necessarily fear the unknown, because there are a lot of unknowns about this technology. There are a lot of ways that it will, or has. It's already helping us work differently, more efficiently, speeding up. But then there are elements, that have real concerns. Will it disenfranchise certain communities that many of us care about? And not just from a loss of jobs. I think there was a stat given this weekend, which is got to check out. It's kind of hard to believe. I think they said in the next 18 months, 82% of white collar jobs will be eradicated. Now, do I believe that's going to happen in 18 months? Nope. Do I believe that we're already seeing the eradication of many white collar jobs? Yes. So there is this habit that I talk about in the book of agility and our ability to embrace this opportunity, this uncomfortable era, this fragile time in a way that allows us to be nimble and to be flexible. And we may have to do work differently. We may have to execute work differently. We may have to impart some skills to young people, and we may have to teach differently. And that's the mindset that there's no turning back. But then on the flip side, there's some things that AI can't do, right? There is a human element to this life that we live that I don't want young people and all of us to forget. AI can't make the connections that will make some of us in this room tonight. AI can achieve, some of the things I talk about in the book and the habits of this, not just networking and exchange of business cards, but the opportunities to actually build relationship. And building relationship is not just critical to business and our ability to get to know each other, but it's also a critical function of what it means to be resilient. So there's some things that technology, no matter how advanced it gets, that yes, we have to be aware of. Yes, we have to embrace. We have to be very aware of the pros and the cons, and we have to be agile. We have to be a bit nimble and flexible to go with it, but with the full recognition that it's not going to solve everything, and it's not going to take away the human connection that's needed for us to maintain this path towards being resilient.
You talk about organizations, you talk about individuals, you talk about emotional resilience,
Yes.
physical resilience.
Yes.
What do we get wrong about resilience as individuals and as organizations?
Yeah. This notion that is optional, particularly in this era of, I didn't know what was going to be going on politically, socially, not just domestically, but internationally. I had no idea that we were coming up so quickly on this disruptive technological era that we're in. But I think that the thing that we get wrong is this notion that resilience is something that we just grab and we just kind of, it's optional, and it's not optional anymore. This is like every day. We better figure out how to do it. We better figure out how to shape up, fine tune, and that's the opportunity, right? I'm literally trying to instigate and propel, if you will, a resilient movement. I'm trying to, and by the way, I'm not alone. So think about it. You know how you have a friend that gets a car that you never heard of, and then all of a sudden, after they tell you about the car, you start seeing the car like everywhere, right? So that's what happened in the lead up to the book about resilience. I mean, literally, I don't care if it's an NFL broadcast that Tom Brady is, commentating on, or I'm watching CNBC. I kept hearing, and we keep hearing now, resilience. It's coming up everywhere, right? And so there's something that I think we have the opportunity to grab on. Clearly, I think folks are recognizing with so much fragility in so many different aspects of our life in this world right now. I think the thing we get wrong is that it's optional. I think this is something that we've got to carry on with us And in many respects, if we were to put the mirror up to a lot of our lives, we have been resilient. You can't talk about this month of February and not talk about this notion of what it means to be resilient. You can't be an immigrant or a descendant of an immigrant community in America and not embrace and not have ancestors that don't know something about resilience. So it's not that it's something that we're not aware of. I think we have to be reminded sometimes of who we are, who we've been, and how we need to continue to go forward towards where we're trying to go.
Really well said. And of course, I do want to open it up to questions. So if you have a question, just
Everyone except your last name is Sharman or Wash. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Many authors that I've listened to have said that writing a book has taught them something about themselves. That's one of the things that they've gotten out of it. Is there something that you learned about yourself in writing it that you didn't know, or is there some insight about your own journey that you got out of writing the book?
I thought you were my friend. It's a great question. And I don't want to, I don't want to be overly simplistic, but I just want to answer it as honest as possible. Mike, I think the thing that I derived from this process and from the book, maybe a couple. One, the fact that I could just do it. But the problem is now I'm trying to encourage everyone to write a book. I mean, like, if you're a friend of mine, you got a story, you got a story, you got a story. I'm like, because we do, right? We all have a narrative. We all have a powerful story that needs to be shared. So the one thing, I think I've done a lot of stuff, Mike, right? You know this as a dear friend of mine. But this is like the fact that I could actually, sit down and like get this done said a lot to me about my own personal resilience. And then if there was a number two, I didn't realize, perhaps initially I thought this process was about me. I didn't realize the impact that it would have on others. When someone tells me, hey, I gave your book to my friend's daughter who's contemplating suicide, and she's shifted her perspective. Or I'm in New York and I see a young brother who's a hip hop head that I know who, does rhymes. And not only does he have the book in his hand with notes marked up, but he actually sent me a song that he made about the book. I never could have predicted. And perhaps, I started out this journey thinking that this was about me. And I've come to understand that it's not. So tell me your name. I know that guy's name, but what's your name?
I'm Nadia.
Hi, Nadia.
I grew up in the South End.
Awesome. The next question would be, what high school did you go to? But we won't go there. I want to do that too.
very Chicago.
Were you afraid when you started into the process of writing this book, generally speaking, and were you afraid of any sort of, backlash or lack of better words from your community? If so, how did it was written that helped you overcome that fear?
Nadia, I was not afraid initially, but I came to understand, and by the way, not that I'm Beyonce or somebody like that, but I learned that these individuals, like who we think are so confident, like they're the ones, like Beyonce is like scared out of her mind when she puts an album together because she doesn't know how the world is gonna receive it. And it's her genius and it's her creativity, but even as large as the life as she is. And so I came to understand a little bit of that fear. Like you just don't know. Like, okay, I'm gonna write this book. Like, what if nobody buys it? What if nobody what if the message is not received, right? Then I'll be honest, let me tell you about the other fear. So I spent most of my life behind the scenes, the assistant to Reverend Jackson, the the guy who, yes, works in DC and represents corporations as an advocate, but, behind folks are not really used to occasionally but this is a lifting of the head in a way that like, whoa. And so when we really got towards the end, I was like, oh my God, I just wrote a book. And I'm like, there's stuff in here that I hadn't even told my family. And there's stuff in here that I've not told my friends. And I'm like, I'm out here now.
Yeah, you're out there.
And so it's no turning back. And so, yes, I'm still scared about that part. Because, again, we talk about this notion of vulnerability, right? I've been able to kind of protect myself. And, I give Dory advice, right? I'm helping her behind the scenes. Oh, now it's like, whoa, you're on Front Street. And so people are getting a glimpse. And I'm still a little scared about that, to be honest. But again, there's something about being vulnerable that's not constraining. It's actually liberating. So I'm now excited and scared at the same time, but excited about, what opening up myself just a bit more may represent an opportunity for someone else. So that's the cool part. But I'm still scared out of my mind now.
Any other questions?
Hey, Avery.
Hey, Avery.
Thomas Moore. I haven't had the pleasure of reading your book yet, but
I'm gonna make your dad buy a couple.
But I was curious of how do you think of persistence and resilience in communities? So I think a lot of times when we talk about persistence and we talk about resilience, it's about individual characteristics that you need to build. But I'm just wondering, how do you think about that in kind of the wider context? And now that you've written this book, how you see yourself as a leader in that space of creating community around persistence and resilience since you've laid the map out?
Yeah, so it is a great question. Thank you. So I talk about resilience as individuals. I talk about resilience from a community perspective. And then I talk about it from an organizational standpoint. To skip ahead of your question just a little bit, I think the opportunity that I think may be the next book is what resilience means inside of businesses, inside of organizations, inside of corporations. But your question about what it means to build resilience in community is very appropriate, again, in this month, right? As someone who has not only been the beneficiary of community organizations, from scholarships to school, from being a student, resilience is built in community. There's no way you can capture in this and acknowledge and celebrate in this Black History Month the resilience of people of African descent in America without talking about community. There's no way that we as individuals could have achieved voting rights, could have knocked down walls of segregation, could have paved the way for women to vote, could have paved the way for LGBTQ rights, could have paved the way for equity in business, for people of color and women without community. I'm blessed to be the vice chair of the National Urban League. My first job was at the Chicago Urban League. I've been on the board with Mr. Compton. I've been on the board of, I'm on the board of Rainbow Push. I've been on the board of the NAACP. And everything about being a part of those organizations and being in community has helped usher in not just our collective resilience, but my personal resilience. And so what I submit in the book is that one of the things we need to do is to connect with organizations in our communities, because we can't make it in a silo, right? You can't overcome everything alone. We have to do it in community, and we have to do it collectively with like-minded organizations that you believe in, that can help you, whether it's practical business, right? Just help, grants, funds, how do I write a business plan? Or just being connected to organizations that you believe in, that share your same thoughts and perspective on issues. I think it's fundamental to be connected and to recognize that being in community is key to embracing and becoming more resilient.
We had one more question right here.
My name is Hector, by the way.
Hello, Hector.
Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
You mentioned this in your first book, right?
Yes, sir.
Feeling that the first book takes longer than yours afterwards. Yeah, some people can write a book every 6 months.
From your lips to God's ear.
So 2 questions in one. One,
Yes.
how long did it take you to write this book? And second, by the time you finish this book, this is the same book that you thought you were going to write before you started?
Great question.
Great question.
So it took me 2 years, maybe 2.5 years to write the book. So let me tell you what happened. I invite everyone to listen to the Power to Persist podcast, because that was one of the things that came out in the build-up to the book. Because I realized, Hector, that, well, what if I could have conversations with individuals around their resilient journey and maybe lift up some of the habits of persistence that I talk about, but maybe glean new. So it becomes even more, yes, I tried to write it in a way that is practical, but it becomes even more practical, right? So that was one of the derivatives, if you will, about the process. And one of the things I learned, right? Is it the same book? No, and I kind of teased that when I talked about my goddaughter and probably the unfinished business, the generational. I wish I had unpacked the generational dynamic a bit more in the book around, what a younger generation, how they look at resilience versus how myself and others who are older look at this notion of resilience. People did tell me, I've had the chance to have some other authors on the podcast. By the way, quick commercial about the podcast, if you don't know. When I thought about the podcast, I said, well, I could go get a studio somewhere, but if I'm going to invite Hector to come on the podcast and talk about his resilient journey, I wanted to do it in a place where mine authentically started. So there's no virtual, no piping in if you're on the podcast. You actually have to come to the studio. I put the studio in the basement of my childhood home at 66 in Cottage Grove. And my mom is right upstairs. So it's like literally, but again, that was one of the things that came out. That was not an initial, I didn't think I was going to start a podcast, right? But that was one of the things that I learned as a result. And yes, check it out. Ashley Etienne, who you see on Meet the Press sometimes, she's this month, and our fellow Chicagoan, John Rogers. Incredible conversation with John Rogers coming up before the end of the month. Power to Persist podcast.
How often are you taping that?
See, you can tell she's a reporter. She's trying to get my secrets. When you start a podcast, and you know a lot of people, you just have to catch people when they come to town.
Right.
And so I caught a bunch of people when they came to Chicago, or I catch people when they come to Chicago. So we release 2 episodes, right? 2 episodes a month, right, Rosemary? 2 episodes a month on the podcast. And so this one with John Rogers, the current one with Ashley is great, but the one Chicagoans, those of us here who know John's story, it was, I'll tell you a little tidbit that we wouldn't know. So most of us, we know who John Rogers is, right? Some of us have spent a lot of time working with John. And, John is he's cool and quiet, but he's intimidating. He's been intimidating to me since he was a kid. And so I was like honored that he's coming over. And he comes with a couple of members on the team. We tape the episode, and he gets up and he looks at me. He says, that was one of the best interviews I've ever had. You don't have to send us the tape. Just go for it. We trust you. I was like, oh my. It really was. And I studied, I prepared. And so please check out, it was a great episode. But that, Hector, is, people told me in writing the book that I'm going to look back at it and not only will I see it afresh and anew, but I probably won't remember half the stuff that I wrote about in the book. I'm still gaining insight, right? new things that I'm learning about this notion of what it means to be resilient. I'm especially learning from the conversations, but I look forward to the follow-up to the book because I've got some different things to say, I think.
And you're working on a workbook companion.
There is a workbook that you can get. You go to lamellmcmorris.com. We have a workbook that for us, and we have a workbook that we're creating for young people that I'll be giving out later this week to them. So please tune in. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations once again.
Thank you, my friend.
On your debut.
Thank you, Lamell. Thank you. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you're listening so you stay in the know about future episodes. See you next time, my friends.
Resonate.